someone saying to me, oh, don't be fragile is offensive, then I'm just too delicate, too sensitive. If we actually are fragile because we're in an emotional state where, something life happens, something has actually happened, or we're worn out, we're worn down, that fragility might actually be true, but it means something different. Yes, actually, I just need to be cared for right now so that I don't break.
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Kristeen Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors. So welcome back to the podcast, and we have an incredible episode for you today. We are talking about when somebody gives you really bad advice, when you're just going about your day, living your life, and someone comes along and gives you the worst advice ever. So Becc, I'm going to hand over to you to tell us what inspired this episode. What experience did you recently have?
Let me tell you guys, I've been going through a time. Just, it's been weeks and weeks now of burning the candle at both ends, staying up late, trying to get things done. Life's very good. Everything's very, very good. And also, I think when we as clinicians, doctors, and all the other kind of things, the kinds of roles that we play in our life, when we ask for all these things, sometimes things can get a little bit out of balance and we can end up with more on our plate than what we can handle. So while I've been trying to keep up with all the things that are near and dear to my heart, and I'm very, very happy that I've had the opportunity to be available for all these things and step into all these things and do all the things that have been in my life, it has simultaneously been very tiring. I'm tired and I've got a lot of plates spinning. And I should say as well, some of the plates that are spinning aren't necessarily things that I'm doing, but also things that have happened, difficult life events, things that are to do with health and also hope and loss and other people. And with all that being said, I feel a lot of negative emotions at the moment, which are completely appropriate for my situation. And I, unfortunately, have received one of the most difficult responses from somebody personal in my life to my current struggles. And that is, well, you're just choosing to be negative. You should choose to be positive. Just be happy. Just get on with it. You're being fragile. So Kristeen and I wanted to bring this scenario to you today and talk about specifically why we don't like that advice, with the goal of bringing this forwards to you so that if you're experiencing this situation anywhere in your life too, when things are getting hard, when you're pushing the limits, when you don't want to be positive, and when being positive isn't the best thing for you, that you don't feel shaken and swept away by somebody asserting that to you with such confidence and such conviction. And instead, you can help yourself decide what you think in the face of that, and with that, how you want to show up for yourself in that place. So, Kristeen, whether it's the exact same words or whether it's something just in general along the lines of the sentiment, is this something that you've experienced in medicine?
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh, very frequently by people who were not invited to speak at me when they were having these thoughts about me. Very, very annoying, very uninvited, not okay. But I got completely triggered, activated when you said there the word fragile. Because a lot of people will say, oh, just be positive, cheer up or whatever. And it's kind of almost like a social norm that people might have just learned from someone else. But someone saying to you, you're just being fragile, that drives me insane. And I was thinking about, as you said it, how I probably have a different relationship with the word fragile. So someone saying to me, oh, don't be fragile is offensive. and sort of implies that they think that there's something wrong with me, that I'm just too delicate, too sensitive, too not what they want me to be. But like, if we actually are fragile because we're in an emotional state where, life happens, something has actually happened, or we're worn out, we're worn down, our defenses are down, that fragility might actually be true, but it means something different. It's not a negative thing. It could just mean, like, yes, actually, I just need to be cared for right now so that I don't break. Like the way we value a fragile thing in the mail, right? It's got like big letters on it, hold it this way up, do this with it, like comes with instructions on how not to break it. And I feel like the way to break someone that you think might be in a fragile state is to say something like, don't be fragile. It's very, very annoying. Okay, so rant. I wouldn't say over. I'm sure there's more in me today. But that really got me going, Becc. That really got me going. So I'm super curious as to, well, I guess I've got so many questions that I could ask you, but obviously we're here today trying to empower people to be in that moment and choose how they respond to that moment. But I guess I just want to ask you, first of all, what do you think are the negative effects of, if I was to be told I'm fragile and I was to take that on board and believe it in some way? I think that is quite a detrimental thing to happen. So I guess I'm just wondering, from your perspective, if we were just to take people's unsolicited comments at face value, what are the negative effects of that? Why should we be doing something different?
I think that's so insightful, picking up the word fragile. Yeah, what's it implying? It's really, if you think about somebody having a negative experience, somebody's having a bad experience as a human, and then because of that, we call them fragile. It's actually just pathologizing negative emotions, pathologizing negative experiences. Like, if you have a negative experience as a human, therefore you are fragile. Ergo, the way to do it right is to be positive all the time. Right? It's actually insane when you think about it that way. And what you've asked, what do we think about that advice? I think this is actually a really great strategy to take and do for yourself in the first place, which is take those words that they've said, and as you did, notice how they affect you. And then actually look into for yourself, like, why does this affect me? What does this word mean to me? And like straight away, I'm like, I don't think I really latched onto the word fragile. I was like, oh, that's insulting. Like, I can see that they're trying to either A, insult me, or B, and probably perhaps B, to think the best, trying to use that sort of negative motivation to be like, go on, just feel better. Like, just feel better. This will fix you. Like, if I'm going to make you feel so bad about how you're responding to the situation right now, then maybe you'll be like, that'll be rock bottom and you'll be motivated to do better. But you just, like, one step further, like you've gone and being like, what does fragile mean to me? I want to be fragile. Like, if that's what we're going to call it, I don't want to try and be a human who doesn't have any negative experiences. I personally experienced that you can't selectively numb emotions. I think if you're going to numb the negative ones, you numb the positive ones too. And I think this is a major problem that we have as doctors. We sort of, we don't give enough airtime to our negative emotions that come with our negative experiences. For example, the tragedies that we experience in the hospital. We've all got stories about how we witness these terrible, awful situations, sometimes in succession. And not only do you experience that tragedy with the patient, but then you experience all of the hurt that comes with the family members. And again, if we're going to use the term fragile when somebody has a negative experience, I want to be fragile in that situation, in that I want to feel that negative experience. I don't want my gold standard to be that I numb out and feel nothing in that experience. That's not my goal as a clinician. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of us kind of get this implicit messaging. Perhaps you don't have somebody standing in front of you telling you that you're being fragile. But when the next step provided to you is to just get on with the next patient, it's kind of implied, isn't it? We're not creating any space, the space and time that it takes to acknowledge this negative emotion, have this negative experience. I'm not saying it takes a lot of time. Like, I truly believe that first step can take just a few seconds. But when we don't create that space, and when it's not built into our healthcare system to take that space, the implied message is you should not feel anything other than neutral or positive, and therefore be able to just keep moving. Or if you feel negative, we don't care. We don't have time for that. It doesn't matter. Get on to the next patient. So yeah, I love that you put on that word, because it makes me realize that what I suppose is meant to be seen as an insult, when we hear just that word alone with the negative connotations, actually isn't an insult at all to me.
Yeah, but it's so interesting the way that you said it can also be implied, because I think the overarching theme is that you're being dismissed. Like, you're having this very valid, very normal human experience that anyone in that same human experience would be having the same emotions or very similar emotions. And you've got this other person giving you, inverted commas, advice, which is basically just dismissing your experience. It's not helpful. And I guess it's an interesting thing. And you can understand maybe why this is happening, because that person clearly doesn't have enough in that, and maybe not at all times of the day, but in that moment with you, they're not holding space for you and your emotions, and they're not holding space for what's actually happening. Maybe they can't carry it today. Maybe it just makes them feel really uncomfortable. Maybe it's inconvenient, or maybe they've just been the subject to this similar kind of approach. So they're just modeling behavior and they're doing it without thinking or realizing the impact. But whatever way you look at it, it's not healthy. It is dismissing something that is otherwise, I don't know, what would you even call it? It's like you say, you don't want to have all positive experiences in your life. I want to minimize the negative ones, if I'm being honest, in an ideal world. But the negative experiences that we have are beautiful in some ways. Like, for example, grief, right? No one really wants to feel grief or have loss, or but it is part of life. Like, death is part of life, losing people, loved ones, is part of life. And when that happens, the reason that you're feeling so bad and you're feeling the grief is because of the love that you have for that person. So it's the same power of the emotion, but just the other side of it, the polar opposite of the love, is the grief. And it's a really hard emotion to hold. Now, that's not to say that, I want to be feeling that every day, but when you're sort of through the other side of the grief and you look back, you can sort of see how beautiful it is to have loved someone so much. And in the doctor world, when we're at the interface of these really harsh things, to care so much. It's beautiful to care so much about other people who are being looked after by you. Ultimately, it's actually a beautiful thing. But this dismissing of the emotion and dismissing of the appropriate response to it, or the way it should be handled, it's actually really interesting. And I'm willing to bet that everyone listening is thinking, yes, this happened to me yesterday.
Even if you can't get on board with, negative emotions being a good thing and a normal part of life. And that's something we work quite hard on in Dare Darling, not pathologizing our negative emotions and making them something that we accept, so that we don't have to suffer that whole experience of resisting our emotions or making it mean that something's going wrong. But it's, as you're saying, even if you can't get on board with negative emotions being a normal part of life and a good thing, even that reaction of dismissing your own negative emotions is detrimental, right? So even if you're like, I'm not ready to welcome in the negative emotions, dismissing them, resisting them, rejecting them is only going to dig you deeper and deeper into the negative emotion, as opposed to what you're trying to do, and perhaps what this person's trying to do, which is bring me out of it, in their own sort of way. But we want to be really careful of not only when, other people do this to us, because we live in a very positive kind of society. We're all, I think in general, we can say a lot of us these days are very uncomfortable with negative emotions. Like, how hard do we find Are You Okay Day, guys? You know, how hard does it feel to ask somebody that question? Not because it's hard to say the words, but because a lot of us find it difficult to hold that space when people respond and say, actually, I'm not okay. Because we get all up in ourselves and we think, well, okay, what am I supposed to do now? And commonly for doctors will be like, I need to do something to make them feel better or to fix this in some way. And it feels difficult. And I'm saying this from experience. It feels difficult to just let them have that space, talk about how negative things are for them, how hard things are, and not respond by trying to make them feel better. And you'll probably see how, you know, with this example with me, how not only unhelpful it is, but actually detrimental it is. Just think about that meta message of, it's not okay for you to feel this way. I need you to feel different. You should feel different right now. So this is kind of the space that we want you all to think about, not even for other people. We want you to think about this primarily first for yourself, because once you experience this with yourself, that actually dismissing my negative emotions is harmful and allowing my negative emotions is ironically a less negative experience. Once you experience that for yourself, it's easier to give that to other people and to not accidentally do the same thing to them.
Yeah, oh, that's so interesting. So people can dismiss our emotions in this situation, but only because we let them. You know, like we are ultimately allowing ourselves to then agree with that person and dismiss ourselves, which hurts even more. Even just saying it out loud, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna let myself down there. I think past Kristeen really did that a lot, but current Kristeen would be a lot less inclined to do that. And I think that's what's really beautiful. And like probably the key message of today is that when you are given this really bad advice, you get to decide what you're going to do with that. And like you're saying, Becc, it's like these emotions, not having a negative relationship with negative emotions is actually a really healthy thing to do. And the way to process them and feel better is not to bury them, and it's actually to allow them to be, so that they leave your body, you get rid of them, you can move them on, and just have that experience. And I guess it's also really interesting what you said about, because I actually saw a reel that you made on social media recently about this very thing, about how beautiful it is to be able to ask someone if they're okay and actually be able to hold space for that answer and really mean it when you ask it, and then really be able to be honest when you reply. And society is just not built for that in many ways, but how beautiful would the world be if we were just more equipped to genuinely be able to hold this space for each other. It's just, it would be such a different world to live in. And as doctors, you'd think that it would be something we would, given what doctors are dealing with on the daily, you'd think we'd be taught this at med school, and we're just not. It's fascinating.
Especially doctors to doctors, right? Like there's not, I think that's a lot of doctors only feel like they can talk about their lives to other doctors because it feels difficult to explain all of the challenging things that happen, you know, again, probably as a result of the way that we experience and think about grief and or loss or tragedy or bad things happen. You know, in society, we kind of like to put our blinkers on to it as much as possible. But, you know, between doctors, we understand not only that tragedies happen every single day. We can all go to our local hospital and see tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. But isn't it a shame that we can be in such a bizarre, unusual situation as doctors, and yet, and with that, actually understand each other so well? You know, we're sharing actually the same experience, dressed up in slightly different ways, but ultimately we're all constantly experiencing this unusual level of tragedy. And yet we don't choose to talk to each other about it. And, you know, as kind of circling back to, you know, how this person responded to me, this person responded to me this way because on some level, they didn't have that comfort level with holding that space. They didn't have that comfort level with negative emotions. And we've all been taught that. I don't think it's innately human. I think what's innately human is to have the full spectrum of emotions and allow them. But I think in our society, we've been taught, you know, just be happy, just play nice, just be nice. While people pleasing, it comes from us trying to protect everybody else's feelings because it's not okay to feel bad. And so if we can all just do our little bit, to start to make negative emotions okay, then we can create this space for each other as doctors to actually talk about the stuff that really matters. Like, do we really want to be okay with these tragedies happening? Do we really want for these terrible things to happen and to just stay neutral all the time? And do we want to call people fragile when they don't stay neutral? Is that the way we want to keep going? Because it's called moral injury for a reason. There's a set of morals that we all have, which none of us are going to part with. There are our ideas about what is good and right in the world. And it's a good thing, I think, to have an idea of what's good and right so that we can keep moving towards that and striving towards that. But as long as we're going to have morals, as long as we're going to decide that, it's a sad thing or a bad thing to experience injustice or pain, and we would ideally like for people to experience less injustice and pain, then when we experience those things happening to other people, we're going to feel negatively about that. You can choose to be positive about that if you like. That advice is on the table if you'd like to take it. But I personally would choose to feel negative. And the difference is, if we don't resist that, and if we allow all our thoughts about that to come up and actually work with them and talk about them, we don't just stay negative forever. We come back and we go back into that spectrum of, life is bad in so many ways and life is good in so many ways as well. So as Kristeen was saying, you've got this opportunity, when people say things to you, to, yes, accept their advice if you'd like. You can match it up with what you think, what they think, and see, is this advice that I want to take? Or is this advice that I'd like to discard because actually what I think is different and I like my reasons for what I think? And in the moment, I don't think that occurs to us, especially when you're in a bad place and then you receive advice that feels bad as well. You can quickly kind of go down the spiral and you feel less and less self-esteem in that moment. And it's okay if you start to go down, as long as you get awareness and come back up and remember, wait a second, just because they think that, and just because, it feels familiar to advice that I've heard from lots of people before, it doesn't make it true. And I get to decide what I think in this moment. And that's the thing that will save you, remembering what you actually think. I don't know, Kristeen, what do you think in these moments? What would, if you received that advice, what would your response be?
I think nowadays I would be wanting to check in with any kind of feedback or anything anyone says to me. I will pass it through a filter and be like, what do I think about that? And sometimes it's not that clear. It might wound you, it might hurt you because your barriers are down. Like you say, when this is happening to you, you're not necessarily your best self on that particular day. So it might pierce you, it might hit you quite deep. And so I've also had scenarios where I maybe go and talk to people who are, my people, my circle, and be like, this got said to me today. What do you think? Because I guess, there are scenarios where, although I don't want to dismiss myself, I want to check in and be like, did I overreact there? Was I at some strange point in my cycle there? Like, what happened there? Do you know what I mean? So I do want to sort of check in with reality. And sometimes you need other people to help you do that or to bounce it around with if it hurts, or if you kind of believe, because it's going to hurt if you kind of believe it. So if you're thinking that and it is hurting, I think it is something to take away to a safe space. But I guess the other thing that I often realize in these situations is usually the people that are saying this to you, they're not really on the same wavelength as you either. Like, they're usually not your bestest friend. They're usually a little bit distant from you, or they just think very differently from you. Like, and there are probably other people in your life that you would value their feedback more, like you can sort of tell that it's a bit off and you're like, I don't really believe that. If you're receiving it from someone that is in your circle though, that you do trust and love, that's much, much harder. And it can be quite like debasing, I'd say. So it's tricky. And I mean, and personally for me, in my upbringing, like, my parents would probably do that to me, like just, straight in your face, like be happy, like, and not from any sort of badness. It's just how they express themselves. But equally, they can hold emotional problems as well if something really bad has happened. It just depends on what it is. But I think what we go through as doctors is so unique. And, what we go through together as business owners is so unique. And you can't expect everyone to understand where you're at if they're not walking in your shoes. I guess it's probably a better way to put it. Like, no matter how close they are to you, if they're not in your shoes, then yeah, you need to ask someone who's kind of in your shoes.
Everything you've said is going along the themes of like separating yourself. You hear these thoughts and then your mind resonates with them. But you're just saying, like, remember where those thoughts are coming from. Remember where those suggestions are coming from, and notice how, that other person only has partial information as well. They're not you. They don't have your value set. They don't have your mission in mind. And also, they only have partial information about what you're going through. And that's why you've got to remember that you're the expert on you. And I think Siri was just listening to me, and it was a male voice. He said, "That's not nice." That's right, Siri. That's not nice. But just, yeah, and I think it's like the moment you receive advice that like grabs a little insecurity in you or makes you feel like you're doing it wrong, prompts that podcast question: am I doing it wrong? Am I doing something wrong here? Am I the problem? Am I being too negative? Am I making a big deal out of this? Instantly, when you're starting to ask yourself those questions, you're either going to be in some kind of anxiety state or some kind of, just with the question, the big important questions, or as some kind of, low, depressed, not clinically depressed, but just emotionally depressed sort of shame state. And then when you're in those states, it's really hard to think well. And then as you're saying, you get that, when you get your awareness back on board, like let yourself feel that pain, get that awareness back on board, and then create that separation, recognizing, remembering ultimately you're the expert on your life and even just this exact experience right now. It's just no right or wrong way, but we all just deserve the ability to process that however feels right to us without making any reaction, positive, neutral, and negative, a bad thing. In any case, what is the point at blaming yourself for how you feel about something if it's not going to actually lead you to do something better for yourself or for the world? And I think that's where I land with this advice. Regardless of whether it's true or not, let's even just put that to the side. I know that if I was going to just try and be positive and feel less negative, that wouldn't work for me. So for any of you guys who are like stuck thinking like from yourself, from whatever societal conditioning you've gotten about how it's bad to feel negative and you should feel positive all the time, or whether it's from somebody explicitly saying that to you, especially if it's somebody in the hospital who's, more experienced than you or just more confident than you, when you receive this message, you've got to, at the end of the day, ask, will this advice actually help me? Right? And that's the whole point of checking in with yourself here. You're basically saying, what do I need right now? What's going to move me, not, into the right place, but what's going to move me towards what's important to me right now? And I know what's important for me in my human experience is to have a balance of negative and positive emotions. And I know that's the way that I want to practice as a doctor. I don't want to numb out my experience. Even if I could flick a switch and turn it off, just turn off all my negative emotions, I would not want to sit down with family members with the inability to feel emotions and have that conversation about what's happened to them. So think very carefully about not only where the advice is coming from, as Kristeen was saying, does this actually match, your value set, who you are? And also with that, what advice or what you personally need to do to move you in the direction you want forwards. Not what's right or wrong, not how you should or shouldn't, but what's actually going to move you in the direction that you want to go. And sometimes it's slowing down and being more negative for a portion of time that's actually going to allow you to get back into that state of equilibrium and ultimately neutrality and positivity.
I love that. And just not resisting it, just letting yourself be and really tuning in. I love that. And I love how you spoke about that in terms of you being the expert on yourself. It's such a great place to finish. So thank you so much to everyone listening. We hope you loved this episode. It's so timely for both of us. It's certainly resonating with us. I hope it's resonating with you. And I hope that the next time that someone gives you bad advice, you are ready to put this into action. And I hope you feel a whole lot better for it. Thank you so much, guys. And we'll see you again next week. Bye.